Well, greetings. I'm Mike Jacoby. I'm the Executive Director of the Illinois Association of School Business Officials, and we're here today to talk about site-level reporting. And this is something that has been studied in different places, but here in Illinois we're at the process of being able to talk about how it might be implemented. But the first thing I want to ask about, though, is why is it here? What is it? So people have a pretty good understanding about what we're really talking about when we say site-level expenditure reporting. And to help me with that, I have three guests here today. To my left is Sarah Shaw. Sarah is the Senior Manager of the Fiscal and Academic Solvency for the State Board of Education. A mouthful and a title, but I'm sure she's going to fulfill that title in unique and effective ways. And then also we have Carrie Stewart. Carrie is the Managing Director of the Afton Partners. And Afton's been given the role to sort of guide this development process of how to make this happen in Illinois, both on the advisory committee side as well as all the way through some of the training elements that might be associated with it. And then Dean Romano. Dean is the Chief Operating Officer at Yorkville School District 115. And Dean is also the Treasurer of Illinois ASBO. So I want to get started with you, Sarah, and just ask, since your role with ISB is to sort of watch over this and watch over the development of this, tell us a little bit more about what is really meant by site-based expenditure reporting, and why are we doing this in Illinois?
A great question to start with, the why. So in 2015, the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, was passed, and in that act there is a provision that calls for site-based expenditure reporting. And in the middle of quite a large law, it's one paragraph, so I'm actually going to read that paragraph to get at exactly what we have to do. ESSA states that the per pupil expenditures of federal, state, and local funds, including actual personnel expenditures and actual non-personnel expenditures of federal, state, and local funds, disaggregated by source of funds for each local education agency and each school in the state for the preceding fiscal year must be reported on the state report card. And states have subsequently received a letter from the Federal Department of Education stating that this reporting must be implemented for fiscal year 18-19, which is to say LEAs will start reporting at the end of 19. In plain English, it means that instead of only having reported our district expenditures at the district level, we will now also be reporting at the site level, and we'll have to show from whence those funds come, whether from federal funds or state and local funds. So these requirements came from the federal government, and often the fear there is that they're going to fall into a vacuum where there's nothing to support it, no infrastructure, no common goals that happen to match up with the new initiative. That is not the case in Illinois, and we're grateful for that. We have both a new accountability system and a new funding system, and this is going to line up with both. So first, even before we had ESSA, we had a Data First grant that came from the feds that's for a state longitudinal data system, thinking of similar to the site-based reporting. How do we use data to better help our districts, to help our districts better help themselves? Second of all, we have the state plan for ESSA that's focused on whole child, whole school, whole community. These are more data points to start rounding out that picture of what makes for whole child support, what makes a whole school, how do we engage in dialogue with the whole community, in addition to the state plan being really focused on equity, which we know is a portion of these requirements as well. Third, we have evidence-based funding. We have new funds, we have a new paradigm of thinking about equity, new pathway toward adequacy. How do we use these reporting requirements as another lens on thinking about our expenditures and our finances? And fourth, we have different concepts, strategic budgeting, fiscal and academic solvency. How do we start thinking about our finances as supports for students in a way that we haven't before? So even conceptually, we have other projects thinking through this. Even a role such as my own that didn't exist a year ago is now in place to help us be bridging some of those gaps. So all of these initiatives are in place. We've been working on them. The site-based expenditure reporting fits straight in. And we think that the goals of each are aligned, specifically for the site-based expenditure reporting to, number one, allow for more intra-district analysis on the relationship between local investments and outcomes, and then also just to be able to have more of a local conversation and an intra-district conversation about transparency in resource allocation for more comprehension and also more inquiry. These data points are not going to be an end unto themselves. They start conversations.
So talk a little bit about how this relates to some of the big issues that have already been sort of launched in Illinois, namely the evidence-based funding model.
Yes. So we've gotten a lot of questions on the relationship between these two pieces. They're very interconnected, but are separate at this point in time. So one misconception has been that the requirements are in the evidence-based funding law. That is not true. They are in the Every Student Succeeds Act. However, we have an opportunity to bring them into alignment. It's not often that a state gets to redo its funding system and redo its accountability and support system together. And we want to see what opportunities we have to put those hand in hand. It also is not a requirement of how you spend those evidence-based funds. We know that the Public Act gives suggestions and cost factors on where money could go, but that it leaves it open to local districts to be making their own decisions. And the ESSA requirement does not change any of that. It simply says, however you spend your money, you must report those expenditures. Third, it is not a requirement to use school-based accounting. So you do not need to set up your budgeting system to ensure that you are doing everything by location codes from the beginning. We do have districts that are finding it is more useful to them if they do it up front, but according to the law, it's simply about expenditure reporting on the back end. And finally, I had one school business official who was very concerned that this was going to turn into, and I wrote it down because it's such a good line, function object codes by location on steroids. And that is not the intent here. So while there will have to be most costs, most expenditures will have to be put in some way, including district centralized costs. We anticipate that districts will have quite a bit of flexibility in choosing how to report those because they are able to reflect their district's reality best.
Well, and that's good news, I think, because one of the things that I think districts are most concerned about is how deep of a dive do they have to go into reprogramming finance systems? How is this going to implement or integrate with auditing and various kinds of other kind of reporting things? So we'll get into a little more detail on that probably as we get farther down the road with some guidance. But that is an important thing for people to know. It's not really about making sure that every code is set up in your system to report it out in a specific way. I'm going to turn to Dean. Dean, you've been a part of the advisory committee. Along with, in our association, Susan Harkin has also been a part of that. She's in District 300. And I've had the opportunity to sit on that advisory committee as well. And I'd like you to just talk a little bit about what ISBE's approach has been with that advisory committee and sort of where we are in the process.
Sure. One of the things to recognize is that it was very clear that we had a deadline, and that was for implementation in the 2018-19 school year. ISBE, along with Afton Partners, had put together this committee, this advisory committee, for us to be able to come and identify some of the challenges and opportunities relating to this new reporting requirement. With that in mind, the committee itself has actually been working to build a multi-year implementation strategy around how we can effectively bring this reporting to life. And so the committee is still working, and we'll be providing that information out as we come forth, both in guidance, training, as well as reporting entities and transition planning for this change in site-based expenditure reporting.
So it sounds like, and I would agree because I've been there too, that the committee is taking on a pretty important role, looking at what this is and trying to figure out the best way to implement that within Illinois. But who's on that advisory committee? What are the inputs? Sure.
Well, there was actually 25 individuals, whether they were superintendents, school business officials, as well as association leaders from across the state. It was very important to Afton Partners and ISBE to pull together a group that really would provide us with representation from small, medium, and large districts, as well as the rural, urban, and suburban districts. Because the perspectives of each of those groups is unique, and making sure that there was a voice relating back to that and bringing forth the diversity that is in existence across the state was a really important component of that. And so that has been a big driving factor for the committee.
So when you talk about that voice from different types of people, that really gets down to the word values, really, in terms of what is the value proposition that the advisory committee would be putting forward in regard to this task. You have the need to be compliant, But what other values are we kind of putting into the mix that the advisory group has articulated?
At our first meeting of the advisory committee, we sat down and worked collaboratively to define the value proposition for the work ahead for the committee. We recognize that the work that we're going to be doing and the changes in reporting do present an opportunity, and that opportunity is really focused on the districts that exist across the state being able to communicate out what they do well, and with regards to how their financial components and how they allocate their resources really do make a difference for kids. And with that in mind, we've actually defined 4 items that I'll present here. The first of which is to make resource allocation more readily accessible to schools and stakeholders. It's to empower LEAs and communities to assess and improve equity. It's to enable LEAs and communities to gain a better understanding of the relationship between student outcomes and the financial resources that support that. And then lastly is enabling LEAs, schools, and the state to identify evidence-based best practices and opportunities to foster innovation between peers.
So that value proposition development was pretty important because that sets the stage for then the work that the advisory group is going to do and also the ultimate outcomes that ISB will be presenting to districts. So where are we on the outcomes right now?
The committee is in the process of developing guidance and instructions to be shared out with our colleagues. As we get together right now, we've still got some components that are really important, but really what's behind that is making sure that we're staying true to the value proposition as well as the components of ESSA that are requirements that need to be met. So the guidance and instructions are not ready for distribution to our colleagues at this point. However, we do have some guiding principles of which will be put together as a part of that information being shared out. I'm going to run through a few of these, and again, these are really key components of where the advisory committee had been as a group to make sure that we were staying focused. First of which is that this is guidance. It's not formal accounting rule changes. And so with that in mind, that should bring a little bit of comfort that it's not actually right there in the accounting rules. However, it's also meant to stay towards the minimum requirements of ESSA. This is not for us to expand out past the details associated with what could be put into place, but really, again, staying to the minimum of the ESSA compliance components. Leveraging existing reporting wherever possible. We don't want to have new reporting that is just for the sake of new reporting, so if there is information that we can gain through things that we're already doing, we would prefer to make sure that that is a focus area. We recognize that context is really important, and so that for us, coupling the financial reporting with the state report card data is going to be really helpful for those that are going to look at this information. Districts know their data best, and therefore they should be the ones to be able to tell their story as this is presented and not be something that is specifically spelled out on how it's going to be reported. And that, quite frankly, this is something that's going to take some time for us to really grow into, to see the effectiveness bear itself out for communities and school districts. So it's an over many years process.
So we've talked about the why we're doing this. We've talked about the advisory committee and its work to date and the expectation of guidance that will be coming. We talk a little bit about what districts can expect and what districts can do now to plan for that future. So Carrie, I'm going to go to you. You've been facilitating the work of the advisory group in conjunction with ISB. So what can you tell districts about what they can expect next?
So districts can expect at least 3 kinds of supports before this reporting year begins. The first set of supports is around instructions, accounting instructions. So think of that as the guardrails to site-based expenditure reporting, what is in versus out, how to treat certain expenditures in this reporting, how we're envisioning this looking in terms of a data table. For those districts that might require more instructions or more support in putting together this reporting, we will also release some guidance around that. So that's the second level of support. And then third, school districts can expect training. And training will come in the form of a few things. First, just in regards to how this reporting is implemented in developing this reporting, but also training around once we have this reporting, what should districts consider using this data for? Of course, we're doing this partly because this is ESSA compliance, but this is also about how do we use data effectively, and this is a new set of data that will be available locally, and how do we drive important conversations at the local level with this information. So the training will center around that as well.
So we're going to have some supports, but the question then really is, what's that timing look like? Here we are, we're approaching the end of 2017. So what's the timing look like?
Sure. So just really backtracking again, this is reporting for the 2018-19 school year. While we don't have a specific deadline from the federal government, we do expect that this reporting, they will require site-level reporting from states probably in the fall of 2019. Working backwards, that sounds far away. It's really not. Most school districts are starting their budgeting process now or within the next couple of months. So we've been thinking about the fact that we really needed to be prepared with the guidance, with the instruction, and with the training as this budget season begins. So school districts can expect to receive the guidance and the instructions hopefully in January. We expect in January of 2018.
So, Dean, I'm going to go to you again because this is going to hit it at the local level. And, it's easy to say that preparation and planning are a key to success, and we definitely want to make sure this is successful. But how should districts be thinking about it right now?
Sure. First and foremost, key members of the team need to be aware that this is coming. This is definitely something that's going to be noticed within the business office as well as the school district as a whole. And making sure that they're aware is going to be really important because as they take and consider the different components that are involved with making these reporting requirements come to life, they're going to want to start thinking and have some time so it's not something that's reactionary. Another component of this is thinking about your financial software. What is it capable of doing? Is it going to be ready for these type of changes? In particular, there's going to be a need for understanding expenditures based on types of funds, in particular the difference between federal funds and state and local funds and how they're being expended. And so with that in mind, there's a third component that's really important, and that is starting to think about, if you're not already doing so, how are you accounting for expenditures by specific site? Making sure that you have staffing associated with a specific building or location. And what do those site codes look like? Do you have that already in your accounting code structure? Those would be some of the key areas in preparation for that. Another component here is to perform an early exploration of your site level financials. Does it exist already? Is there something that you're already doing that you can kind of take and convert in a small component as compared to a complete overhaul of what you do? The other thing is be aware that more information and support is coming. That's critical to understand, that this won't be something that you'll have to come up with on your own. That guidance will be forthcoming, and I would look for that starting in January of 2018. So that would be something else that I would tell everybody out there to be prepared for. And then the other thing is that those that can and are in place to do so, start to think about how these changes are going to impact you with regards to your budget development. I know many of my peers at this point have already started or are beginning to. Some get the opportunity to start a little bit later in the process. But being on the front end of it and understanding that these changes are coming, are there things that we can do now to prepare and make it the reporting A, more meaningful, and B, more realistic to be completed in advance of the changes becoming something that we're going to have to report back to in arrears. Again, it's something we report out onto at the end of the school year, so if we put some stuff into the budget on the front end, we're going to be in a better position to do the reporting at the end.
That's really good. And I think, honestly, if districts are thinking about their story now, that helps them also in their planning. Because if they're doing that allocation of resources through the budgeting process and beginning to think about what's going to what school, for what reasons, and why, because of the student population and demographics and things like that, they've already got their story starting to be written. Absolutely. And that would be an important part for them to consider.
And one of the things that we had talked about in the committee, we gave some examples about schools that, quite frankly, they might only have 200 students in them. But you may have a sister school across town with the same grade levels that has 700. And when people see that these numbers are coming out with regards to how we're doing our expenditures, being able to be prepared to explain the difference of why we're doing so much more as far as dollars here as compared to here, and it could be simply as simple as the number of students that are enrolled within the building. It could also be associated with the different types of programs that are inside of those buildings, and being prepared to explain why there are more supports in this building, because those supports are needed to help kids. And having that on the mindset as you're preparing and developing, I think it's going to provide people with an opportunity to be really successful in telling their story and how unique it is when actually this information is out for the community to take a look at.
Great. So we've learned a lot about what site-based expenditure reporting is. We know where we're going as a state in terms of the timelines and what people can expect. But Sarah, how do people interact with the committee, you, Carrie, myself, Dean, as we go through the remaining part of this process?
Great question, because we know that there are a lot of questions out there, and some of the feedback that we've gotten from the field has helped us to shape the guidance and making sure that we are going to be addressing the needs that folks have in being able to implement. So 2 main resources I would put out there. Number 1, ISBE does have a website set up for ESSA as a whole, and under that website there is a tab for site-based expenditure reporting. It's a pretty easy website. It's www.isbe.net/ESSA, and you'll see a tab on there that's labeled as site-based expenditure reporting. Anything public that we're doing is going up there. Webinars, slideshows, the introductory letter to districts. So anything that we produce, we'll make sure gets up there for public consumption. People are also welcome to be in touch with me. My email address is sshaw, S-S-H-A-W, @isbe.net, or you can call 217-782-0249. Happy to take calls and be able to walk folks through or field concerns. And then finally, thank you to IASBO for putting out IASBO at iasbo.org as another resource, especially for our school business officials thinking about how this affects them directly.
And I think that for our viewers, there are going to be lots of questions about, what are the details and so forth. And I would say the guidance is going to answer quite a few of those. But in the meantime, be sure you're interacting in some way to give sort of additional guidance beyond the advisory committee so that that can be incorporated into the final guidance documents that are going forward. So we want to thank our panelists for being with us today. Thank you, Dean and Carrie and Sarah, and for the work that you've been doing along the way on this particular project. And also thank you to all of you who have tuned in to watch and learn more about site-based expenditure reporting. And we look forward, I know Illinois IASBO does, to engaging again once the guidance is out and being able to walk through that and look at the very specific elements of that and make sure it's very clear to all of our members and all districts across the state. So thank you again, panel, and thank you for tuning in.